Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Cognition podcast. This will be our final episode for the year. And this one's going to be a little bit different than some of the other episodes that we've doing. Really focusing today on just a handful of announcements that are bringing us into the new year. So got some really exciting news, several different areas. First and foremost, the Cognition podcast is getting an upgrade. So this first year has really been kind of playing around with different formats, kind of figuring out what works for this podcast, what the audience enjoys, and various different ways that we want to deliver. And so you've likely noticed that we've had different approaches over various different episodes, but recently have certainly shifted more in the direction of a conversational approach rather than some of the monologues that we did in earlier episodes. And one episode in particular I enjoyed extremely well. I feel like this person aligns very well with both myself as well as the podcast itself in terms of looking at future technology trends, the risks associated with those, and kind of a mixture of excitement and reservation around that emerging technology. So with that, had some conversations with, so actually our last episode was with Len Noe, and have had some conversations since with him, and he will be coming on as a permanent co-host of the Cognition podcast. So extremely excited to have him on board. I would encourage you, if you didn't hear it, check out the previous episode. We did have a really interesting conversation on the future of transhumanism and some of the other emerging technology trends. But that being said, Len, tell us and the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, Hutch, thank you very much. I had an absolute blast, when I was on here with you, a couple of weeks ago. And when you reached out, the fit, especially with the direction that the podcast that you're taking, AI, futurist, I mean, that's really right up my alley. And as you said, if I highly recommend anybody that, missed the episode that I had recorded, go ahead if you want to get a little bit more background. But I am one of the world's most well-recognized transhumans. I have multiple subdermal technology implants in my body, and the direction that I plan on going, I plan on being completely robotic by the time my life ends. I want to be like Futurama. I just want to be the head in the glass that just talks to people.
Love it. Well, yeah. So obviously, I mean, there's few people that share that same level of enthusiasm and embrace technology to the extent that you do. So I can't think of a better person to talk about kind of forward looking what's over the horizon. I think you may be a little bit more of an early adopter than some of us who are probably a little bit more scared or squeamish to be at that bleeding edge to the extent that you are. But
and that's the thing, the fact that we're already here, and you've been talking about it, ever since I met you years ago, around the LLMs, AI, generative chat models, and just the future of tech from almost like a software and interface perspective. Whereas I've been looking at it from a different direction, but we're both going in the exact same direction. So with both of our backgrounds in security, mine a little bit probably in a little bit darker places than yours. But I think between the two of us, I think we have, a really good framework to help try and bring a lot of this futuristic type of tech and concepts into today's conversation so that we can actually be in a position where we can be safe moving into this future. and at least, if not safe, not get hit with a sucker punch, not knowing it's coming.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that one of the big challenges coming forward is just how fast things are moving now. And I think having, if nothing else, just kind of rational discussion that is informed by a good context of understanding what those technology trends are is going to be extremely useful. So definitely excited, looking forward to the conversations going into the new year, and can't wait to kick this thing off.
Oh yeah, and if I could take this opportunity, you know, I can't think of a better place to drop a little bit more of a tidbit teaser about some of the stuff that's coming up with me than my first episode here with you. I had put out on LinkedIn a little while ago a little teaser that I had entered into a project with Wiley Press. So just like you, when I grow up, I want to be like you, Hutch. I want to be, a successful author and, award-winning author, and we'll talk about that before we get done here. But yeah, I am basically going to be putting out a book around the transhumanism hacker concept. We're still kicking around different title ideas, but we're shooting for a release date probably sometime around August of 2024. And it's my hopes that, through this, opportunity with Wiley, I kind of like what you just said, man. The future's coming, whether you're ready for it or not. So I've been saying for years, how do you stop attacks if you don't even know they exist? So I'm going to put it all in paper, and people will get to see what it's like to actually be a transhuman from my perspective.
Awesome. Yeah. Can't wait for that. That is going to be a fantastic read. And not to mention, I think you have a unique perspective that there are very few people in the world that can kind of see the future of technology and through the same lens that you do. So can't wait to see what you come up with.
It's really an interesting feeling to actually be able to physically touch digital technology.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I am extremely excited. I also wanted to just take a moment and thank ITSP for, the welcome that I got from them. And I can't wait to see what kind of conversations we have moving forward. The possibilities are absolutely endless.
Yep, that's another good thing to point out for anybody that maybe isn't currently following Marco's podcast, Redefining Society. He did a really entertaining kind of look into the next year of 2024, making predictions about generative AI. It was a panel that myself and Len got to join, as well as several other kind of distinguished professionals in different areas working with artificial intelligence. So made for some really interesting conversations. So definitely worth looking up that episode. Again, that's Redefining Society.
Yeah, that was actually a lot of fun, and that takes us right up to where we can segue right into this amazing new book that just came out, The Language of Deception. If anybody hasn't seen this yet, I highly recommend this book. I'd love to tell you that I have, the minute I got it, I sat down and I couldn't put it down. And the truth is, it is that kind of a read. But the problem is I have a very, very busy life. But, this is amazing. And right off the bat, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't this come out as like one of the #1 books on Amazon as far as artificial intelligence at release?
Yeah, the release has been fantastic, and the reception and the support from the community. So I released the book last week, and it immediately on new release was the #1 new release in the category of artificial intelligence. Has consistently been in the top 10 of all artificial intelligence, and pretty high up there within the computer hacking and internet privacy categories as well. So doing exceptionally well. It's still obviously just starting to get in the hands of people, so the reviews are still pretty light. So for anybody that has seen it yet or got your hands on it, definitely leave me a review. I'd love to have honest feedback from anybody that cracks the book open. But really excited to finally. It's been a year-long journey. I know a journey that you're now, as you just mentioned, just starting. So when you put that much time into something and that much effort into something, it's really exciting to see the end of that journey. So thrilled to get this book out, and looking forward to what's next. I guess with that, I obviously we did want to talk a little bit about the book too. I think it'd be interesting kind of to give everybody a little bit of insight into the background on that book, because what I think, of course, most people probably wouldn't think it, but because artificial intelligence really has only been buzzing significantly for the past year or so, and the book itself really is a story that goes back almost 20 years. So it goes back to the year 2004, which was the year that I was a senior in high school. It also was the year that Google released their new flagship service, Gmail. And so at the time, Gmail was still invite only. You had to know somebody who knew somebody in Silicon Valley in order to get that invite code and have early access to the platform. And so as a tech enthusiast teenager in high school, of course, I was bragging about the fact that I had access to Gmail to absolutely anybody that would listen. And I was also dating a girl at the time who was a bit of the crazy eccentric type, and was at a party with her one night, and she started having a conversation with me about all of the different pets that she had growing up. And of course, I took this stroll with her down memory lane,
You
and
gotta be there.
yep, exactly, and kind of told her about some of the pets that I had growing up. I didn't think twice about the conversation, and the next day I go to log into my Gmail account, and sure enough, I can no longer log into my account. This girl, it took me a little bit to piece together what had happened, but this girl had managed to.
Social engineering.
I was and what's fascinating is, of course, this was when Google wasn't, or Gmail wasn't even publicly available. So there is a very real possible argument for the possibility that I may have been the first person to have his account compromised
You were the very
on Gmail.
Gmail compromised. Oh my goodness.
I was setting the trend. But so what's interesting is I wasn't ignorant of hacking culture at the time. I was already had already done quite a bit of scripting and coding, had done some system exploitation, but I guess it had never really occurred to me that in absence of any kind of technical vulnerability, that I could be that vulnerability. And so I think it was that point where I got really interested in the topic of social engineering and manipulating people as a potential means to an end. But what I did realize almost immediately is that unlike other types of hacking, there is a specific challenge related to social engineering. While it is by far the most effective way to achieve a particular goal, it also is, unlike other forms of hacking, it's not scalable, or not easily scalable. So other things can be scripted out, they can be automated, they can be done thousands of times a second. With social engineering, you have to invest the time, you have to establish rapport with your potential victim, you have to build that level of trust, and then use that trust in order to exploit them. And that is a very difficult thing to scale. So it was about a decade later that I got this idea of, what if it would be possible to scale that type of attack, to automate that kind of attack? And this was in the very early stages of kind of chat-based conversational artificial intelligence.
If we can break there for just a second.
For sure.
This is way well before the LLMs that we are currently familiar with. So at this point, the concept of machine learning and artificial intelligence was extremely in its infancy.
Oh yeah, it was bad.
It conceptualized basic algorithms, and you, even at that point, were able to look at what was available and project into the future and see the potential with this. I mean, how were you able to look, and it's easy to see today when we look at things like Bard or ChatGPT, where you can just be like, how do I create a piece of malware? But what I'm trying to say is, back in those times, we weren't dealing with fully completed systems, with a really good UI. How did you look at what was available in its infancy and see that potential based on what was available? Because, like you said, at that point, you were basically dealing with very rudimentary type of search queries. It didn't have the ability for the neural net that we have today. How did you look at this little lump of tech and go, this little blob is one day going to be able to do the type of scaling and be able to deal with the idiosyncrasies of a conversation? I mean, what was it about that gave you that forethought?
So I stumbled upon and this has been around for a while, but there was an entire geek subculture community called Personality Forge. And it is actually, again, it's still around. It's by today's AI standards, it's extremely primitive and painful to even look at. But what it was a system that allowed people to create rule-based conversational systems. And there was quite a few different features in there. You could add different kinds of randomness. You could add variability in various different ways to that conversation. And it was an entire community of people that to a large extent, we're trying to beat the Turing test, trying to make something that was coded to seem as human and authentic as possible. And of course, in the absence of anything like our modern large language model capabilities, generally that, even if you were able to pass the Turing test, so to speak, it was usually for a very short period of time. Something could create an illusion of intelligence for maybe a conversation that lasted between 5 and 10 exchanges of text. But after that, something would go off the wires or off the rails, and it'd be like, okay, I'm very obviously talking to a bot.
All your
So,
data belong to us.
yep, exactly. So I going back to kind of that experience that I had, I started kind of replaying that in my head. And why didn't I have any red flags go up whenever she was talking to me about my pet? And the simple reason was because I was in a dating relationship. I was in a context where I was trying to get to know someone, and I knew that they were trying to get to know me. So it made me think maybe that is the best possible context for trying to compromise people's security questions, which of course 10 years ago, there still wasn't a whole lot of MFA or multi-factor authentication around. So a lot of times that's all you needed was the answers to those questions to get access to someone's accounts. And so I actually, I built an entire chatbot infrastructure, and the code for this is still on GitHub, admittedly not well commented, but it basically was an entire infrastructure for deploying an entire botnet on two freely available dating websites at the time, OkCupid and Plenty of Fish. And what it did was these bots would go out and it would use actual bots from Personality Forge to automatically start interacting with people on these sites, and then would just randomly inject recovery questions into those conversations at a random interval. And what I found was and again, to your point, the AI was very obviously not human when you interacted with it, at least from my perspective. But surprisingly, even back then, about 5% of the time, people would fall for this. And I chalk it up to stupidity, or I think probably more so just a genuine desire for people to connect with other people, desperation or whatever you want to call it. But
psychology of social engineering. So, and to that point, I love the examples that you put in the back of the book as far as like trying to get, do not take no for an answer, and the examples you showed it, and the thing that I find absolutely terrifying, and this is nothing that you and I haven't really talked about before, is the fact that we are using our native language to actually interface to a computer which is using that language and then returning it back to us. Up until now, I mean, everything that we've done has been on a keyboard, which is going to go back to an ASCII character that goes right back to a bit value. We now have to take into consideration the nuances of language. And when you look at the amount of data that these LLMs have, they know more ways of trying to take a look at the panel we were on yesterday. AI is now better than an actual lawyer.
Yep.
Not just because it can pass the bar, but the funny, using that analogy, I heard something, and I'm gonna quote where I got it from. I don't know if you ever met Evan Litwack. He's one of the principals for that works at CyberArk, but he said lawyers are nothing more than attack librarians.
I like it.
But think about that for a minute. What does a lawyer do? They go research case history. They find, examples that, prove their arguments. So as a human being, we are going to always be limited to what we can remember. If you take the entire law library and make it available to an LLM, of course they're going to be better than us. So what happens, and to your point, back in the day when you were making these originally, this was very rudimentary. We're now at a point where the LLMs can actually successfully imitate and circumvent any type of obvious types of grammatical errors that would lead to detection of, a non-human entity.
Yep. Yeah, what was interesting, there was an MIT article where they were, and it was back in 2017, which ironically was the year that Google published the transformer architecture, which was used for all these large language models, but obviously wasn't deployed in anywhere near the capacity that it is now. But in this MIT journal, it was basically how to know whether you're interacting with the bot online, and it kind of pointed to some of those things like grammatical errors or some of the traditional Nigerian prince red flags that you would see. But it pointed out that bots are getting better. Those aren't always going to be the case with systems. But it basically said that the one way that you can tell is kind of its inability to carry on a rational conversation for any period or sustainable period of time. And that's changed. I mean, that was, and I say it's ironic that was the year that the transformer architecture came out, because that was kind of the reason why everything pivoted away from that. But now, I mean, you interact with somebody online, it's relatively impossible to know one way or another whether there is actually a human at the other end of that, or if it is completely mechanical.
The bots can now, and the LLMs can actually even take into consideration what we're using as slang. TY, thank you, WTF. It understands this. So I think one thing, especially around your book, that I think would, and I'm hoping that as I finish the read, you're going to get more into this. And if you would like to comment on it, I think that would be great. We've talked ad nauseum, you and I, in terms of deep fakes, AI, how all of this is playing in. What do we do? I mean, we have a problem. You can't tell the difference between a bot. I can't tell the difference between a bot. 9 times out of 10, you can't tell the difference between a deep fake. So where does this, as people, security professionals, and even just the common average man, how do we stay safe in this new world with these new technologies that are being implemented in so many areas of our lives? Microsoft is building Bard into the OS and the browsers now. Google is looking into adding AI into the search engines. So even if you don't think you're dealing with AI, it's being added to a lot of the software and the applications that we're using. So how do we maintain our safety?
Yeah, it's definitely the amount of challenges that are coming at us at a fast rate is going to be, I think, nearly insurmountable. I think obviously one of the ways that we combat this I guess you really need to take it from a couple different perspectives, because I think there's certain things that individuals can do to try to make themselves more resilient. There's also the question of organizations. How do you protect your organization's infrastructure and your personnel? And then I think even more challenging than both of those is at a macro societal level. There are huge risks that if we as a society don't get on the same page about, it's going to be really hard to tackle these. And so I think the individual one is probably the easiest, but it also requires personal accountability. And that is that I think individually we need to stay informed and aware of what capabilities are out there and just have a general mindfulness of the fact that there are people that are going to use these capabilities, not always with the best intentions in mind, and remaining vigilant in that regard.
Well,
Unfortunately,
to that point, the legislation just passed in Europe yesterday or the day before yesterday around AI.
Yep.
Do you see this actually doing anything? I mean, when you look at it, may help for those large LLMs, but the fact that now we see a lot of small companies spinning up their own, language models and using their own data sets. How is this legislation actually going to help rein in when anybody can write their own algorithm? And do you see type of legislation coming here to the US and having any type of actual teeth here?
So I haven't had a chance to fully dig into the new European legislation. My understanding from what I've heard is that it takes into account various different characteristics of models to classify them into different risk categories. And based on the category something falls into, determines what level of oversight is placed on the operations of that model. And I honestly, I like the precedent. I like the fact that there is at least initiative that's being taken, that these conversations are being had. My understanding is that it's very subject to interpretation and pretty vague, which unfortunately any time in legislation and regulation makes it extremely hard to enforce anything. And I think unfortunately there is an inherent problem with meaningful regulation around this, and that is the typical prisoner's dilemma, especially when you consider that in many ways artificial intelligence is becoming the new arms race. It is generally well understood by leaders of the world that AI is going to be the deciding factor in global supremacy going forward. And because of that, there is the consistent pushback, whether valid or not, but it's going to be a point that's consistently made of if we regulate and the other guys don't, we're essentially shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak. We're making it to where we can't possibly retain global supremacy.
We can't even compete on the same field.
Exactly. And so I think that unfortunately there is a need to all get on the same page globally, but the hurdles that are required in order to get there, to get to meaningful regulation that isn't negatively impactful to our society, to Western free democratic culture as a whole, I think are extremely challenging problems. And I like that there are conversations going on. I'm hopeful that we as humanity can get to a point where we can solve some of the bigger risks that are larger than just a single nation state. I think there are serious questions around alignment. I think there are, one of the challenges with this thing is we don't know how far this thing can potentially go. We're at the very beginning of what is potentially an exponential curve in machine intelligence. We already know that systems like GPT-4, to your point, smarter than a lawyer, can pass the bar exam, is consistently scoring in the top 99 percentile of human beings in terms of Mensa level IQ tests. And that begs the question, if we continue to invest in this technology, we continue to make these neural networks larger and larger, allow them to make more and more complex logical connections about the ideas that are described within the language that we're feeding them. How soon do we hit a point where we aren't just dealing with intelligence that's comparable to human level, but we hit this point of superintelligence, something that's far beyond what we can even comprehend whenever it is arriving at a conclusion, or especially in the case of when we're making agent-based systems, making actual decisions. And so I think there is that very serious alignment problem, but and unfortunately, I think cart before the horse, we really should, ideally in a perfect world, we would want to solve that alignment problem before we continue to make these things bigger and bigger. But of course, free market capitalism is not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. You know,
so
my fear, because my understanding of the legislation is essentially the same as yours. And my concern is this is going to be almost viewed like GDPR was in the beginning, where it will not matter until somebody actually falls victim and there are consequences to pay. You know?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that's regulation a lot of times. Enough planes have to fall out of the sky, and people have to get in car accidents before regulation is taken seriously, and that's unfortunate. And unfortunately, in this case, it may be a situation where the stakes are much higher in terms of the incidents.
Dealing with a situation that we're used to. You know, the idea of a leaked database, or, you know, somebody misconfiguring a WAF that allows access to exposed data. This we're used to. The concepts of where an LLM could go, you know, we don't even know. I mean, it's creating polymorphic malware. It's creating new attack code that, as human offensive people, we've never come up with. So I think that, in my opinion, I agree with everything that you've said, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wait, and somebody is going to have to be the victim. Somebody is going to have to be, you know, pulled out on the carpet before the legislation actually has teeth, and people will actually start to take what's written beyond the fact that they're words and it's a regulation and we're just checking a box.
Yep, and you're probably right. And I think in that case, where there is potential value in the book is not, it does acknowledge kind of those challenges with global regulation and with progress in that regard. But then there is the question of, well, in the absence of any well-enforced global regulations, we can at least do what we can to make sure that I'm not the reason that global regulation does move forward at some point, or my organization is not the reason. So,
based on your experience here with the technology in the States, do you see the potential for the legislation being different as it gets? Because I know that Congress here they've been talking about legislation around AI since the COVID lockdown. I remember, you know, there were things, you know, Congress is taking up, is AI safe? And then if you think about it, for about 9 months, there was everything on the news was about generative chat models and bias and everything else. And I don't want to necessarily get into that part. But the way that AI is looked at politically, I think you brought up a very good point. From a political perspective, this is dealing into the future of the technology arms race. But just in general, where do you see that going?
Unfortunately, I am a little bit pessimistic in my regard of seeing meaningful legislation here I think that the way that our two-party system operates, and especially in the context of so many different factors right now that are increasingly polarizing society, I think we're increasingly seeing the way that the United States government functions becoming less and less functional. It's extremely difficult to get anything done because you unlike you go back 20, 30 years and people would walk across the aisle, so to speak. There would be bipartisan partnerships and discussions. And unfortunately, I think that the technology era has been a large contributing factor to further polarizing our society, to pushing people to opposite extremes. And in truth, I think that most people are well intended. I think that Generally, on the right side of the spectrum, you have kind of an emphasis on rational thinking and pragmatism. On the left side, you have idealism and making sure that we're doing the right thing. And I think that there's value to both of those perspectives. And I think that they're very important to a functional society. And being able to find a middle ground between those is critical to progress. But I feel like increasingly we are hitting a deadlocked situation where, and I think largely what I would expect is probably more on the progressive side, there being interest to move forward with regulation on this, where I think that the more conservative perspective is going to be, unfortunately, championing that prisoner's dilemma perspective of, if we slow our industry down, China wins. And I think there's valid discussions to be had on both of those perspectives as well. So
I throw a crazy thought in here. And are you familiar with a person by the name of FM 2030?
I'm not.
FM 2030 was one of the Julian Huxley was the person that came up with the original term of transhumanism, but it was FM 2030 that actually gave it the current definition of transhumanism. And the reason I ask that is just because of your last discussion around the two-party system. FM 2030 was a futurist, and he claimed that in the future, we would still be in a two-party system, but it wouldn't be, political parties. It would be all around the people. It would be technology, would be the politics. He said that there would be two parties. You would have the upstreamers and the downstreamers. The upstreamers were the people that would accept technology moving forward in harmony with it, whereas the downstreamers would be more old-fashioned, mechanical, manual process. And as funny as it seems, just by your definition, we've almost made FM 2030's future, but we didn't do it by calling them upstreamers and downstreamers. We've just done it by the actions of the political parties in place.
Yep. No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
And one that isn't. So we've actually moved into the futurist, society that FM was talking about, God, back in the 70s.
That's fascinating.
It's crazy when you look at it from that perspective, because you gave the explanation that he gave 50 years ago. The only thing that's different are the labels.
And the fact that he was looking ahead and saying this is what the future holds, and now we're looking at society as it is and actually seeing it come to fruition.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and I think if nothing else, that shows the value of the futurist perspective of looking forward and kind of anticipating what is to come and what we can do to better situate ourselves to take advantage of that future. Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of times the future isn't stoppable. It's coming, and it's really just a matter of anticipating and preparing.
The thing that I would say is the future is already here. We keep talking about the future as if it's far away. I'm a transhuman. You're a specialist in artificial intelligence and large language models. The future isn't tomorrow. The future is now. And we just need to realize that we're living in it. And how do we live in it properly?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we could talk about this all day. And now that you are permanent fixture of this podcast, as exciting as it is, we will continue to have these conversations. So to all the listeners, everybody that's joining, thank you for the support over the past year. Really looking forward to doing a deep dive and really getting into this next year and talking about some new and amazing stuff. So with that, I guess if just to do one final plug, the book is the Language of Deception: Weaponizing Next Generation AI. It is now available on Amazon. So if you are interested in these topics, definitely go out and grab you a copy. With that, any final words, Len?
Absolutely. This has been an amazing way to close out 2023 and a beautiful way to start 2024. Again, thank you to ITSP Magazine and their welcome. Thank you, Hutch, for giving me the opportunity and the invitation. I'm greatly honored to be a part of this, and I look forward to putting out some amazing content with you and having some just mind-blowing conversations.
Awesome. Yeah, same. All right. Well, with that, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. We will see you guys in 2024. Yep, all the things. All right. See you guys next year. Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.